The neutral spire never slept. It only pretended to rest. Orbiting the swollen red giant Varkesh 9, the station rotated through artificial dusk that washed its alabaster corridors in slow, dying light. Ambassadors drifted through climate-controlled promenades. War profiteers toasted fragile truces in private view lounges. Intelligence brokers sold tomorrow's casualties by encrypted whisper. Peace, on the spire, was a performance maintained by gravity and fear. Captain Elias Vale stood at the edge of a panoramic window and watched the giant star convulse. Each pulse released radiation storms that would liquefy human flesh in seconds. The spire's shield held, barely. Engineers falsified the safety margins weekly. Bureaucrats signed the lies without reading them. Some structures weren't meant to last. Some men weren't meant to survive. Elias rested his forehead against the reinforced glass. The faint vibration of stellar turbulence hummed through the bones of the station and into his skull. It matched the rhythm of his pulse, slow, measured, exhausted. He had learned long ago that panic wasted oxygen. Behind him, 2 Accord security officers stood at assigned distance. Close enough to kill him if necessary. Far enough to pretend they were protection. Witness protection, the Stellar Council had called it. Elias called it a waiting room for execution. The summons had come 12 hours earlier, confirmation that the tribunal would proceed as scheduled. 4 galactic blocks. 1 human witness. 1,000 political futures balanced on testimony the council claimed to want and secretly feared. He knew how this ended. The air behind him shifted. Not the sound of footsteps. The absence of them. Every fleet strategist learned the physics of silence before learning the physics of fire. Elias turned. The first blade slid between his ribs with surgical precision. White heat detonated through his chest. His breath fled in a soundless exhale as the world tilted. He struck the floor on one knee, fingers skimming polished alloy as blood bloomed dark against sterile metal. The second strike never came. He looked up. She stood before him like a shadow condensed into shape. Tall. Lithe. Green-violet skin that drank the dim light instead of reflecting it. The ridged lines along her jaw marked Kithari gene forging. Assassin caste. Dominion property. Her blade hovered at his throat, close enough that the radiation-scorched keystone of the spire reflected along its edge. Her eyes were wrong. Not for their shape. For what flickered behind them. Recognition. Not of his face. Of his blood. A single drop slid from the wound at his chest and struck the floor between them. It shimmered faintly before darkening. She inhaled sharply, an involuntary sound that betrayed her conditioning. The pause lasted less than a second. It was enough. Elias drove his shoulder into her center mass. The impact hurled them into the wall. Metal groaned. The dagger tore free and clattered across the corridor. The world spun, bright with shock. She recovered instantly. He barely did. Her knee struck his diaphragm and sent him crashing backward. The officers drew weapons too late. The corridor alarms hadn't yet triggered. Assassins chose their windows precisely because systems hesitated. She seized him by the collar and lifted him with inhuman strength. "You are not the man they described," she said. Her voice carried no accent, just exact articulation shaped by Dominion linguistic discipline. Elias tasted copper. "You'll need to be more specific." She studied his chest where the wound steamed faintly. Kithari eyes processed chemical spectra invisible to humans. Her pupils tightened. "You should already be dead." "So I hear." Her hand loosened. Alive was not part of her algorithm. The floor trembled as emergency bulkheads began sealing sectors. The spire reacted now, always late, never sufficient. Security opened fire. She moved. Not away from Elias. Through him. She twisted, using his body as brief cover as energy bolts carved ozone through the air. One grazed her shoulder. Flesh cauterized instantly. No cry escaped her. Then she was gone. The corridor descended into screaming static and flashing red light. Elias collapsed as the last of his strength fled. The security officers dragged him clear as medics flooded the sector. He drifted in fractured consciousness as stimulant foam sealed his wound and the alarms spread like contagion across the spire. Assassins were expected. Hesitation was not. He woke inside a null-field recovery chamber, where sound died before reaching walls and gravity adjusted in fractional increments to stabilize torn tissue. Medical drones stitched synthetic capillaries into violated muscle. His chest burned with chemically suppressed agony. A woman stood at his bedside. Council robes. Black thread sigils of the neutral judiciary. Authority disguised as neutrality. "Captain Vale," she said. "You're fortunate." He exhaled slowly. That's not the word most people use after surviving an execution attempt inside a diplomatic sanctuary. "It would have succeeded," she replied, had the assassin not stopped. That earned a thin smile from him. "Then send her a thank you." The woman did not smile back. "We have never recorded a Kithari aborting a confirmed kill." Elias closed his eyes. The image of the blade at his throat had followed him into sedation. The moment where death had chosen to blink. "What did she see?" the woman asked. "My blood," he said. "They tend to notice that when it leaves the body. That is not sufficient." "No," he agreed. "But it's all you're entitled to." Silence pressed between them. Finally, she leaned closer. "The Dominion has activated 3 covert fleets along Accord lanes. Your testimony has accelerated something far older than this tribunal." Elias opened his eyes. "Then we're running out of time. Then you must survive the next attempt." He studied the sterile ceiling. "I'd prefer survival to be defined more precisely this time." Zedwira-Keth did not bleed. She burned. The pain receptors along her damaged shoulder fired in controlled pulses as nanocytes sealed carbonized tissue. She perched within an abandoned maintenance spire 3 sectors from the failed strike, surrounded by the distant thrum of station reactors. Mission failure pulsed through her neural index like poison. Impossible. She reviewed the moment frame by frame. Blade angle, perfect. Entry depth, optimal. Cardiac margin, sufficient. Human death was mathematically assured. Except it had not happened. Her sensors replayed the blood signature again. And again. The anomaly did not decay with analysis. It intensified. Ancient markers. Hybrid suppression chains. Genetic encryption older than the Dominion itself. Impossible. The Dominion had erased all prototype lineages after the Orion Pact. All but one. The implication warped her operational core. Targets were variables. This one was a proof. She accessed buried Dominion archives sealed behind execution-grade authorization. Systems balked. She overrode them using command codes imprinted before memory formation. Truth unspooled like rot beneath polished doctrine. Humans had never been meant to survive the last war. They had been meant to serve as substrate. As foundations. As living keys. And Elias Vale carried the lock in his blood. Her directive split. Kill the man and preserve the Dominion's myth. Or spare the man and shatter the engine of the galaxy. For the first time since her creation, Zedwira-Keth experienced uncertainty without corrective programming to erase it. The sensation was unbearable. And irresistible. She rose. The hunt was no longer for a target. It was for a decision that could unmake empires. The corridor descended into screaming static and flashing red light. Elias collapsed as the last of his strength fled. The security officers dragged him clear as medics flooded the sector. He drifted in fractured consciousness as stimulant foam sealed his wound and the alarms spread like contagion across the spire. Assassins were expected. Hesitation was not. He woke inside a null-field recovery chamber, where sound died before reaching walls and gravity adjusted in fractional increments to stabilize torn tissue. Medical drones stitched synthetic capillaries into violated muscle. His chest burned with chemically suppressed agony. A woman stood at his bedside. Council robes. Black thread sigils of the neutral judiciary. Authority disguised as neutrality. "Captain Vale," she said. "You're fortunate." He exhaled slowly. That's not the word most people use after surviving an execution attempt inside a diplomatic sanctuary. "It would have succeeded," she replied, had the assassin not stopped. That earned a thin smile from him. Then send her a thank you. The woman did not smile back. We have never recorded a Kithari aborting a confirmed kill. Elias closed his eyes. The image of the blade at his throat had followed him into sedation. The moment where death had chosen to blink. What did she see? The woman asked. My blood, he said. They tend to notice that when it leaves the body. That is not sufficient. No, he agreed. But it's all you're entitled to. Silence pressed between them. Finally, she leaned closer. The Dominion has activated 3 covert fleets along Accord lanes. Your testimony has accelerated something far older than this tribunal. Elias opened his eyes. Then we're running out of time. Then you must survive the next attempt. He studied the sterile ceiling. I'd prefer survival to be defined more precisely this time. Zedwira Keth did not bleed. She burned. The pain receptors along her damaged shoulder fired in controlled pulses as nanocytes sealed carbonized tissue. She perched within an abandoned maintenance spire 3 sectors from the failed strike, surrounded by the distant thrum of station reactors. Mission failure pulsed through her neural index like poison. Impossible. She reviewed the moment frame by frame. Blade angle, perfect. Entry depth, optimal. Cardiac margin, sufficient. Human death was mathematically assured. Except it had not happened. Her sensors replayed the blood signature again. And again. The anomaly did not decay with analysis. It intensified. Ancient markers. Hybrid suppression chains. Genetic encryption older than the Dominion itself. Impossible. The Dominion had erased all prototype lineages after the Orion Pact. All but one. The implication warped her operational core. Targets were variables. This one was a proof. She accessed buried Dominion archives sealed behind execution-grade authorization. Systems balked. She overrode them using command codes imprinted before memory formation. Truth unspooled like rot beneath polished doctrine. Humans had never been meant to survive the last war. They had been meant to serve as substrate. As foundations. As living keys. And Elias Vale carried the lock in his blood. Her directive split. Kill the man and preserve the Dominion's myth. Or spare the man and shatter the engine of the galaxy. For the first time since her creation, Zedwira Keth experienced uncertainty without corrective programming to erase it. The sensation was unbearable. And irresistible. She rose. The hunt was no longer for a target. It was for a decision that could unmake empires. The second time Elias opened his eyes, the ceiling was different. No rounded medbay curvature, no soft spectrum panels. Just a flat, matte surface with hairline seams and a faint ripple where emergency plating met original architecture. Whoever had relocated him had chosen function over comfort. His chest throbbed in a slow, disciplined rhythm. The painkillers had been calibrated by someone who understood interrogation schedules. He shifted carefully and took inventory. Room, narrow, windowless, one door. No visible cameras, which meant the entire space was a sensor. The bed frame was bolted to the deck. A single chair rested against the far wall. No table, no personal effects. Not a sick room. A holding cell disguised as convalescence. He let the realization settle without emotion. Shock was a luxury, clarity was currency. The door side open. A man in Accord grey stepped through, carrying a slim console. Human, late 40s, compact build, the kind of face that vanished into crowds. Not council, no robes, no insignia. Operational staff. Captain Vale, he said, voice dry. How's the chest? Still inside my body. Elias pushed himself upright. I'll mark that down as an improvement. The man moved closer, stopping just outside arm's reach. His eyes tracked Elias like a patient bomb technician. Senior Marshal Cade. Internal security. I'm now responsible for you not dying. Bold of them to assume that's still achievable. Cade ignored the remark and flicked his console on. A translucent field appeared between them, medical readouts on one side, security flags on the other. The surgeon says the blade missed both hearts by a margin measured in molecules. Cade tilted his head. You told the tribunal you only had one. Elias watched the pulse lines crawl across the display. One rhythm, not two. I told them what they were cleared to hear. The marshal's mouth compressed. If you conceal relevant biological data, we can't anticipate methods used to kill you. You're operating under the assumption that anyone here wants that outcome prevented. Their gazes met, held. Cade spoke first. The Dominion claims no involvement. They're blaming rogue elements, as usual. Of course they are. The Kithari strike unit we traced to this sector vanished from our networks 12 minutes after your attack. Whoever sent her is deleting footprints as they go. Not well enough, Elias murmured. Cade tapped the console again. The image shifted to a still frame of the corridor, Elias on his knees, blood spreading, and the tall figure looming over him. The assassin's features were blurred by the station's censorship algorithms, but the outline remained unmistakable. What I need from you, Cade said, is a reason. For what? For why she stopped. Elias studied the frozen moment. The angle of her wrist. The slight recoil in her posture. He remembered the intake of breath, the first crack in something that had believed itself unbreakable. She saw something she didn't expect, he said. Your charming personality. My blood. Cade folded his arms. Explain. Elias weighed options. Truth was a weapon that could miss its mark. Yet keeping it buried had already failed to save anyone. During the Orion campaigns, he said slowly, there were rumors in fleet intelligence about a classified genetics program. Not ours. Something older the Dominion had inherited from previous regimes. Hybridization projects. Seed populations embedded across human colonies. Weapon strains. Control strains. Keys to infrastructure we were never supposed to access. He paused. When the pact collapsed, those records should have been destroyed. The fact that I'm breathing suggests someone made a different choice. Cade stared at him. You think you're one of those keys? I think she recognized the pattern in my blood when she cut me. And for the first time in her career, she couldn't predict the consequences of finishing the job. The Marshal considered this, eyes narrowing. If that's true, every power block on this station will want a sample. Council. Dominion. Rim syndicates. Half the people negotiating peace out there are really bidding on leverage. That was true before you wheeled me into this box, Elias replied. You just didn't have proof. Cade shut down the projection. The room seemed to shrink as the light faded. We're relocating you to Witness Block 3, he said. Deep core, armored hull, layered security fields. No windows, but the air's clean. A vault, Elias translated. 4 dangerous evidence. 4 irreplaceable testimony. I haven't given it yet. Then don't die before you do. Cade stepped back toward the door. Escort will arrive in an hour. Be ready. The hatch closed with a sealed, final sound. Time bled differently when confined to small spaces. Elias used it like a tool. He tested the limits of his body, flexing against the ache in his chest until he could stand without trembling. The null field medicated his movements with subtle resistance, forcing controlled exertion. He welcomed it. Pain mapped the edges of survival. He replayed the corridor encounter in his mind, frame by frame, overlaying it with half-remembered intelligence reports, fragmentary files marked with obsolete clearance codes and redacted names. Experiments involving human captives. Foreign markers grafted onto baseline genomes. Whole populations disappeared under cover of planetary evacuations. You were never meant to outlive the war, a senior analyst had told him once, drunk on contraband whiskey. None of us were. We're residue. He hadn't believed it then. He believed it now. The assassin's hesitation was more than shock. It was recognition of a design feature she'd been trained to ignore. In that instant, they had both understood the same thing. Whatever lived inside his cells wasn't just a secret. It was a fulcrum. Which meant she would come back. Not as a hired blade this time, but as a seeker of answers. Good. He preferred opponents who needed something from him. Distorted clean lines, created angles. When the door opened again, Two armored officers waited with restraint cuffs. He extended his hands without protest. "Standard protocol, Captain," the taller one said. "If it makes you feel safer," Elias replied. They marched him through a series of service corridors rather than the public transport rings. No windows, just repeating segments of plating and intermittent status panels. The station's heart beat faintly through his boots, coolant pumps, shield generators, life support cycling billions of lungs worth of air. At each bulkhead, biometric scanners chirped, doors split, and the route narrowed. They were taking him deep. "New block?" Elias asked. "Reinforced sector," the shorter guard answered, keeping his gaze forward. "Witness units, high-risk detainments, sensitive archives. Neighbors sound interesting." "Not your concern, sir." They reached a junction with 3 possible paths. The officer on the left consulted his visor display, frowned, and gestured ahead. "Conduit passage. Lift core at the end." Elias stopped walking. "That's wrong," he said quietly. "Move," the taller one snapped. "Conduit passage is under maintenance," Elias continued. "Shield recalibration. It was on the repair docket before I was stabbed. Unless someone rewrote an engineering schedule in the last 6 hours, we're about to walk into a blind zone." The shorter guard hesitated. "Command didn't flag." "Command isn't in the habit of broadcasting vulnerabilities," Elias cut in. He turned his head slightly, as if considering. "Take the right corridor. It routes around the maintenance ring and still leads to the core." The taller man stepped close. "You don't give orders here. I'm giving you survival advice. There's a difference." The 2 officers exchanged a brief, uneasy look. Protocol warred with instinct. In the end, fear of disciplinary action lost to fear of unknown threats. The taller one cursed under his breath. "Fine. Right passage. But if security audits this, I'm noting your suggestion." "By all means," Elias said. "I enjoy documentation." They changed course. 10 meters down the alternative corridor, a maintenance hatch stood slightly ajar. Light leaked from the seam in a soft, unnatural shade that didn't match station standard. The shorter guard raised his weapon. "Seal breach." Elias lifted his bound hands a fraction. "Allow me to guess, you weren't warned about that either." The taller officer tapped his comm, no answer. Static hissed for a second, then cut out completely. "Comms dead." So this was the blind zone. Just relocated. Elias exhaled slowly. She was good. The taller guard approached the hatch, weapon at shoulder. As he reached for the manual control, the panel slid aside on its own. Darkness yawned beyond. Something moved at the threshold, swift, graceful, almost soundless. The guard fired. The shots burned against an invisible barrier, dispersing in molten spray. An arm blurred. His weapon clattered to the deck. A single precise strike to the side of his neck sent him crumpling. The second officer swung his rifle. A narrow stun pulse kissed the base of his skull. He folded without a cry. Elias remained standing. The figure in the doorway straightened. Her outline resolved from shadow, familiar height, lethal stillness, gaze that had measured his heartbeat while deciding whether to end it. No uniform this time. Dark, flexible armor patterned with faint sigils that shifted in response to ambient fields. Her blade rested at her hip, sheathed. "You changed the route," she said. He noted the absence of formality. No honorifics. No mission code phrases. "You blocked the original one," Elias replied. "I assumed you preferred privacy." She stepped into the corridor, eyes flicking briefly to the unconscious guards. "You used them to test my reach. Tools are meant to be used. And you, Captain Vale?" Her gaze returned to him. "What are you meant to be?" "Apparently," he said, "a question you can't answer." A fractional silence stretched between them, less threat, more calculation. "Walk," she said at last, indicating the open hatch. "We talk somewhere the Spire's algorithms aren't listening." Elias glanced at the fallen officers. Breathing, stable. She had pulled her strikes. Mercy, or pragmatism? He stepped toward the threshold. For the first time since defecting, he wasn't moving under council orders or Dominion coercion. He was walking into a negotiation none of the great powers had authorized. That, he thought, was the closest thing to freedom he'd been offered in years. He passed through the hatch and into the dim service chamber beyond, feeling her presence at his back like the promise of a blade that hadn't yet decided which way to fall. The service chamber was older than the neutral spire's public decks, a forgotten artery of infrastructure abandoned when the station's diplomatic expansions had outgrown its original skeleton. The lighting here was minimal, maintenance-grade strips embedded low along the walls, casting long horizontal shadows that warped depth perception. Elias stepped carefully, guided more by the cadence of his own breath than by sight. The hatch sealed behind them with no lingering echo. Zedwaraketh moved first, scanning the chamber with efficient angles of vision that suggested layered targeting priorities. Every motion was deliberate, stripped of unnecessary aggression. Whatever had fractured her mission parameters had also altered her posture toward the world. "You've entered a blind volume," she said. "No surveillance lattice. No quantum trace. It will remain invisible for 18 of your minutes." "Convenient," Elias replied. "Did you plan that, or did I just get lucky?" "Neither," she said without inflection. The Spire's designers prioritized diplomatic opacity over structural redundancy. An inefficient choice. He almost smiled. Spoken like a systems engineer. They stopped near the center of the chamber. The walls bore scoring from ancient plasma tools, relics of a time when the station was still assembling itself in orbit. A faint vibration coursed through the deck, distant engine harmonics, the sound of a machine never fully at rest. Zedwaraketh turned to face him. The ambient light traced the ridges along her jaw and the subtle articulation of muscle under armor. "You carry Dominion architecture in your blood," she said. "Explain." "No," Elias answered evenly. "You don't start negotiations by demanding classified revelations." A minute tightening touched her expression, not anger, but recalibration. "Negotiation requires symmetrical leverage," she replied. "You possess something I cannot eliminate without destabilizing consequences. That is leverage. So is your hesitation back in the corridor," he said. "The moment you chose not to finish the strike." Her gaze hardened. That was not a choice. It was an anomaly. Everything that matters starts that way. For the first time, Zedwaraketh looked away from him, not in distraction, but in deliberate pause. When her attention returned, it carried a different weight. "My existence is structured by executed directives," she said. "Deviation is defined as malfunction. Yet the data extracted from your blood conflicts with Dominion suppression records. The probability that my creators falsified core history now exceeds operational tolerance." He studied her carefully. "You were engineered not just to kill, but to preserve a narrative." Silence followed. The station's vibration continued, indifferent. "I was designed to stabilize outcome probabilities," she said. "Your presence destabilizes them." "Then we're in the same position," Elias replied. "The difference is that I chose it." That earned him another fractional pause. He sensed her running internal projections at a speed that dwarfed any human strategist's ability to mirror them. But prediction was only as reliable as the assumptions feeding it, and hers had just been compromised. "What you intend to reveal to the Stellar Council," she said, "will initiate kinetic responses across at least 5 power blocks. Your survival probability beyond that event approaches 0. Comforting forecast. Yet you proceed." "Yes." "Explain." Elias exhaled quietly. "Because the Accord isn't peace. It's a paused massacre. Entire systems live under economic strangulation disguised as treaty compliance. Species classifications written by victors dictate who governs, who mines, who gets food shipments on time. The war never ended, it just learned better manners." "You seek moral correction," she said. "I seek rupture," he replied. "Morality can argue afterward." Zedwaraketh absorbed that without visible reaction. Her designation as executioner had never required her to understand motive beyond utility. Now she was being asked to evaluate intent, and intent was not a variable her creators had optimized for. "The Dominion authorized my deployment because your testimony jeopardizes structural supremacy," she said. Yet my systems indicate your survival could instead destabilize hidden control arrays far older than the Accord itself. The projected chaos exceeds acceptable margins. That sounds like a strong argument for killing me now. Yes, she agreed. Then why haven't you? She hesitated. Not long. Just long enough. Because the same analysis reveals a second-order probability, she said. That your survival could activate dormant counterstructures designed to oppose Dominion primacy. You're describing a failsafe. A buried one, she said. And incomplete. Elias regarded her with quiet intensity. Then you don't need me dead. You need me positioned. Her eyes flicked to his bound hands. You assume agency. I assume inevitability, he corrected. You can either participate in shaping what happens next, or spend the rest of your existence extinguishing fires you don't understand. That landed. Outside the blind volume, the neutral spire continued its performance of order. Ambassadors floated between conferences. Vote counts shifted. Proxy envoys finalized clauses no one would read until it was too late. None of them knew that a Dominion assassin and a defected strategist were redrawing probabilities in a maintenance chamber beneath their feet. Zedwar Arketh paced a short distance away, armor whispering softly against itself. When she turned back, her posture had shifted again, less that of a hunter and more that of a vector adjusting course. There is an auxiliary witness registry beneath judiciary oversight, she said. Unacknowledged by public council records. High-value truths are archived there under predictive quarantine. A truth prison, Elias said. A buffer, she replied. Your data will be sequestered before it reaches open session unless you bypass that tier. His gaze sharpened. You're telling me the tribunal is staged. I am telling you it is moderated. By whom? By an oversight committee originating before the Orion Pact. Its members serve no single bloc. Then who do they serve? Continuity. Elias let out a slow breath. The oldest tyrant there is. There is a secondary access route, she continued. Non-council infrastructure. It intersects the witness transfer lattice before quarantine insertion. Only someone with assassin clearance would know that. Yes. He studied her steadily. Then your deviation is no longer undecided. It's already active. Her reply was almost inaudible. Correct. The chamber lights flickered a warning cadence. Zedwar Arketh moved instantly, blade half-drawn. Sensors flared across the armor of her forearm as incoming probability curves snapped into focus. Security triangulation has resumed, she said. They have achieved partial reacquisition of this sector. How long before the walls fill with armed ideals? Elias asked. Less than 2 of your minutes. Then we're nearly out of philosophical runway. She cut the restraint cuffs at his wrists with a single precise motion. Metal parted without sound. Sensation flooded back into his hands, pins and fire, then control. His eyes met hers. This is the part where people usually ask whether they can trust you. That would be irrational, she said. Good, he replied. I prefer clarity. The far wall slid aside, revealing a narrow access tunnel sloping downward into the station's deep mechanical strata. Hot air rushed up from below, carrying the metallic scent of coolant and the distant thunder of reactors. This route will evade council choke points for 7-node transitions, Zedwar Arketh said. After that, probabilistic cover degrades. And after that, she said evenly, you will either be in position to fracture the oversight lattice, or dead. Elias flexed his fingers, steadying the last tremor from the wound in his chest. Then we'd better not be slow. They moved. Behind them, the maintenance chamber sealed as the first security detachment breached its perimeter. Weapons lit the darkness they no longer occupied. Orders rang out into empty space. Elias and Zedwar Arketh descended into heat and shadow, allied by incompatible objectives yet bound by a convergence neither of them fully understood. Above them, the Stellar Council prepared to convene. And beneath the polished rituals of governance, old architectures shifted, stirred by a living variable that had survived when it was never meant to. The descent ended at the station's forgotten foundation. The reactor arbor rose around them like a cathedral of engineered fire. Layered spirals of conductive lattice girded a churning stellar siphon, its captured plasma flowing in disciplined torrents toward the spire's power spine. Heat distorted distance. The air tasted of charged metal and exhaustion. Elias moved carefully across the narrow maintenance walk, one hand skimming the railing as the vibration of the core traveled through his bones. Every system that kept the neutral spire alive whispered below his feet. Zedwaraketh halted near a junction of control trunks and tilted her head, listening to streams of information Elias couldn't hear. "The oversight lattice is 3 levels above this node," she said. "Your presence will trigger archival rejection once you intersect its envelope." "Which is precisely why we're here," Elias replied. "I don't plan to be archived. I plan to be witnessed." She extended a filament cable from her forearm and interfaced with the nearest trunk. Light cascaded across her armor in quick pulses. Her posture remained outwardly calm, but Elias sensed the strain beneath the surface layers of locked command hierarchies resisting intrusion. "They designed this to survive civilizational collapse," she said. "Its permissions aren't political. They're evolutionary. Then let's give it a reason to adapt." The lattice shuddered. Across the spire, subtle gravity fluctuations rippled through diplomatic chambers and private suites alike as power routing adjusted to unauthorized access. Security systems hesitated, uncertain whether to treat the anomaly as sabotage or maintenance failure. In the Judiciary Wing, Senior Marshal Cade stiffened as half his boards dimmed at once. "Trace that," he ordered. "That is the trace," an analyst answered quietly. Above them, the Stellar Council assembled in circular tiers of transparent seating that overlooked the slow-roiling red star beyond. Representatives of the 5 dominant blocks floated within individualized gravity envelopes, each surrounded by advisors and encrypted partitions. Cameras threaded through the chamber like metallic insects. The tribunal was moments from commencing. Below, Zedwaraketh's armor dimmed as she severed the final constraint. "It will accept you as input," she said. "But only once. The moment it propagates, control reasserts." Elias stepped toward the exposed junction. "What happens to you?" Her answer came without hesitation. "After this, Dominion systems will mark me as compromised architecture. Termination authority will activate. And you're proceeding anyway." "Yes." He regarded her, not as an asset or adversary, but as a being standing at the edge of irreversible exile. "Then whatever history writes next, you won't belong to the story your creators planned." "Correct." He placed his hand against the junction. The system recognized him instantly. Not by biometric scan. By structural resonance. The lattice unfolded. Along the spire's internal networks, dormant channels awakened archival strata buried beneath eras of deliberate obfuscation. Data long believed corrupted reconstructed itself from distributed fragments scattered across thousands of forgotten redundancies. The truth did not arrive as a single revelation, but as a convergence. In the council chamber, the center dais activated without authorization. Light poured upward in a sudden, blinding column. Every screen suspended in the chamber shifted at once. Gasps rippled through assembled delegations as deep record footage replaced the scheduled testimony feed. Human colonies burning under Dominion bombardment. Kithari strike vessels deploying ahead of declared conflicts. Gene architecture schematics stamped with Dominion precursor insignia. Population thinning algorithms masquerading as post-war resource projections. And beneath it all, human genomic chains encoded with access signatures. Elias's blood was not unique. It was the last iteration. Across the chamber, diplomats surged to their feet, shouting in overlapping tongues. Emergency protocols flared. Juridical containment barriers snapped into place around the dais. Marshal Cade stared at the unfolding cascade, comprehension tightening his jaw. "Isolate the feed," demanded a counselor. They couldn't. Below, Elias felt the lattice drink deeply from his cellular structure, mapping suppressed markers into the network's reproductive logic. He didn't cry out. The sensation was not pain. It was removal, the lifting of a weight he had never known he carried. Zedwaraketh steadied him with one gloved hand as his knees threatened to give. The lattice is rewriting its enforcement parameters, she said. It no longer serves continuity alone. What does it serve now? She watched the energy conduits reconfigure as the station's deep systems recalibrated to a new equilibrium. Counterbalance. At the chamber above, oversight committee chambers sealed automatically as their infrastructure went dark. Private command lines dissolved. Proxy authority collapsed into open exposure. The Accord's hidden spine had been severed. A Dominion envoy vaulted from his gravity field, fury distorting his features as he shouted denials drowned beneath the roar of rising turmoil. Representatives of RIM systems, once mute under treaty bindings, began transmitting suppressed census data live across open council channels. The galaxy was no longer being briefed. It was watching. Cade's console pinged with cascading alerts, then stilled. He looked up at the center dais as a figure rose within the uncontrolled light. Elias Vale's uncensored image assembled from overlapping biometric streams, gaunt, wounded, resolute. His voice entered the chamber without amplification. "You tried to bury this beneath procedure," he said. "Beneath clauses and vetoes and sanctioned silence. But you built your peace on living templates. On erased populations that never consented to become locks for systems they would never control." The chamber shook under the force of competing escalations as block fleets along Accord lanes shifted out of holding formation. "Whatever survives this," Elias continued, "will not be clean. There will be realignment, contraction, and collapse. But there will also be something you fear far more than war." He lifted his gaze. Unmanaged truth. The feed ended. The dais went dark. Below, the lattice sealed itself. Zedwara Keth released the cable from her arm. Its end blackened, permissions permanently burned out. She staggered slightly as Dominion command protocols tore free from her neural substrate. The first kill directive she had ever refused arrived as a delayed echo and died incomplete. Elias steadied her. "Your systems. Fragmented," she said evenly. "But autonomous." A tremor rippled through the deep structure as emergency bulkheads began executing probabilistic lockdown patterns no longer governed by political exception. "Security will reassert in seconds," she added. "We will not exit by conventional routes." Elias regarded the reactor storm rising beneath them, incandescent rivers of controlled annihilation. "Then we don't exit through the station." She assessed him with renewed calculation. "I can shape a thermal corridor," she said. "It will not be survivable by standard physiology. My physiology hasn't been standard for a while." Her gaze shifted fractionally as new projections aligned. "Your probability of survival remains under 10%. He met her eyes without bravado. "That's higher than it's been since the tribunal was scheduled." Below them, the captured star surged as power demand spiked across the wounded spire. Zedwara Keth shifted her stance, stabilizing against the rising roar. "If you are wrong, your death will be absolute." "And if I'm right," Elias replied, "this galaxy gets its first unlicensed future in 1,000 years." A beat passed between them. She nodded once. The corridor of fire opened. Heat slammed into him like a living wall as Zedwara Keth cut a path through the reactor's outer veil, sculpting a transient sheath of force around their descent. The world narrowed to forward motion and the brutal insistence of survival. Externally, the neutral spire's power output plummeted as its deepest stabilizers briefly unraveled. Across orbital traffic corridors, ships reeled and rebalanced as gravity harmonics wavered. And then, silence. They emerged far below the station's orbital shadow into open vacuum where emergency ejection fields caught their fall and hurled them outward along divergent escape vectors. Elias's body tumbled through the dark, cocooned in emergency containment light shaped by Zedwara Ketha's final projection. The stars wheeled with indifferent clarity. For the first time since defecting, he was not running toward testimony. He was fleeing consequence. Across the spire, regimes fractured in real time. Treaties collapsed into provisional blocks. Dominion fleets surged outward under crippled command integrity. RIM worlds broadcast defiance without encryption for the first time in generations. And somewhere in the tangled aftermath of truth released without mediation, A new instability took root, neither liberation nor annihilation, but a volatile interval in which unowned futures could form. Elias drifted between stars, consciousness thinning at the edges as the containment field carried him toward unpredictable coordinates. Behind him, Zedwaraketh vanished into a chaos her creators could no longer map. And the galaxy, stripped of invisible hands, began the long, uncertain work of choosing what it would become without being told.